New Wave Community Media.
It's just J-Mike.
Hello, my darlings. Welcome to a new episode of Generation Mix Podcast, aka GMP with Jolie. That is me. So today's deep dive is again in Wikipedia, discussing two public figures. One is going to be a jazz musician, and I know nothing about jazz, y'all, but it's still good to learn about pieces of history and public figures in our community, to know that they were the trailblazers and stuff. So this is the thing. Guy's name was William Henry Joseph Bonaparte Bertholf Smith. It's a long name, y'all. He was nicknamed the Lion. And the other one is about Vivian Cash, wife of the late Johnny Cash. She's passed away as well. Who, when they were married, was accused of being a black woman. There was like a big whole brouhaha back in the day. But before we dive right into that, since today's a Sunday, I like starting off my podcast episode with something about me, just for shits and giggles, So I like to know what y'all usually do on Sunday, because I know for me on Sunday, growing up, of course, being raised Roman Catholic, meant going to church, being a kid, playing, yada, yada, yada. And then as I got older, of course, then it became errand day. And then it sometimes would morph into, well, I'm hanging out somewhere for the weekend and I'm just chilling with my friends, or I'm just going to stay in and not do a damn thing, So Sundays could be, either or, pretty much whatever I felt like doing. But yeah, just a little curious about y'all. Sunday fun day, Sunday relaxed day, whatever you want to call it. So anywho, my darlings, so let me jump in and we're going to start with this young man, the Lion. And here we go. So, first of all, he was born November 23rd, 1893 in Goshen, New York. We're going to go with his name again. William Henry Joseph Bonaparte Bertholf, okay? But they named him Willie, which is good because, again, really long name. His mother and grandmother chose his names to reflect different parts of his heritage. Joseph, after Saint Joseph in the Bible, Bonaparte, French, and Bertholf, biological father's last name. William and Henry, which were added for spiritual balance. When he was 3, his mother married John Smith, and Smith was added to the boy's surname after his stepfather. In his memoir, Smith reports that his father, Frank Bertholf, was incorrectly spelled as Bertoloff in many sources, was Jewish. Smith's New York birth record shows him as William H. Bertholf. His father, Frank Bertholf, an electrician from nearby Monroe, New York. Smith became at least somewhat conversant in Yiddish and studied Hebrew with children of a Jewish family who were clients of his mother's. He made his bar mitzvah at age 13 in Newark. His mother, Ida Oliver, had Spanish, Negro, and Mohawk Indian blood. Her mother, Ann Oliver, was a banjo player and had been in Primrose and West minstrel shows. Smith also had 2 cousins who were dancers in the shows, Etta and John Bloom. According to Ida, Frank Bertholf was a light-skinned playboy who loved his liquor, girls, and gambling. She threw Frank out of the house when their son Willie was 2 years old. After Frank Bertholf died in 1901, his mother married John Smith, a master mechanic from Paterson, New Jersey. When Willie was 3, his mother and stepfather added the surname Smith to his legal name. He grew up in a large family with his mother and stepfather in Newark, New Jersey at 76 Academy Street. John Smith worked for C.M. Bailey pork packers, and he would leave the house around midnight to pick up freshly killed pigs and take them to the packing house. He was supposed to be home by 4 a.m., but would usually go to bars after work. Eventually, Ida tasked the boy Willie with accompanying his stepfather to work in order to encourage him to come straight home and not go drinking. Willie said he enjoyed this task, but most of the time he had to drive the horses home. He only worked on Fridays and Saturdays as his mother did not want him to miss school. He later wrote in his memoir about being at the slaughterhouse with his stepfather. I couldn't stand to see what I saw at the slaughterhouse. I would watch wide-eyed as the squealing pigs slid down the iron rails to the cutter where they were slashed through the middle with the two halves falling into a hot tank of water. The kill sometimes went as far as many as 400 pigs a night. It was a sickening sight to watch, but the cries from the pigs brought forth an emotional excitement. There was another weird but musical sound that I could still hear in my head. The squeaks, the squeals, the dipping them in hot water. They put them on a hook, take off the head, the legs, going down an aisle. I hear it on an oboe. That's what you hear in a symphony. Destruction, war, peace, bounty, all mixed. In 1907, the family moved to 90 Bloom Street in Newark. They moved again around 1912 when his stepfather got a new job at Crucible Steel Company across the Passaic River in Harrison, New Jersey. The job paid more, and Willie was assigned to get him away from work before his bosses got him drunk on his own money. He attended the Baxter School, rumored to be a school for bad children. The school was notorious for brawls among the ethnic Irish, Italian, and African-American children. One day, Willie was in Mrs. Black's fruit store and was caught with his hand on her register. According to his memoir, Smith had wanted to borrow a dime to see S.H. Dudley's traveling roadshow at Blaney's Theater. The owner shocked Willie by turning him over to police. Mrs. Black's son-in-law was the number 3 tough guy in Newark. Reportedly, the family hated policemen and generally wouldn't allow them into their store. Willie was charged in children's court and sentenced to a $10 fine and probation. After that incident, he was transferred to Morton School, which had a lot less brawling, and began 6th grade. He attended Barringer High School, then known as Newark High School. In an effort to get the attention of girls, he attempted a variety of sports, including swimming, skating, track, basketball, sledding, cycling, and boxing. He learned to swim in the Morris Canal. Prize fighting was a sport he was most interested in. Smith has said that maybe that because I've known most of the great fighters from way back, they like to visit the nightclubs. He got to kid around with Jack Johnson, Jack Dempsey, Battling Siki, Kid Chocolate, Sam Langford, Joe Gans, Bob Fitzsimmons, Henry Greed, Joe Lewis, and Gene Tunney. Fitzsimmons owned a saloon on Market Street in Newark. It was where Smith learned about Stanley Ketchel, Kid McCoy, Benny Leonard, Jimmy Britt, and Charlie Warner. Smith also joined a gang. Their club was called the Ramblers. 2 members were Abner Zwillman and Niggy Rutman. He was one of 2 African Americans in the gang. The other was Lewis Moss, who Smith called a sweet talker who could take his foes apart. Moss later became known as Big Sue and owned a saloon in the Tenderloin, Manhattan. Moss acted as his own bouncer at his club. According to Smith, Moss was about 6'4" and 240 pounds. Smith used to play piano in his back room to help him out. So, stop for a second there. So when I read this about the Tenderloin, Manhattan, me living in the Bay Area, all I know is the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And I'm like, oh, we had a Tenderloin back in New York. And I did just a quick little sneak peek as to what area and where it was. And apparently the Tenderloin back home in New York was about, it was a heavily prostituted area. It was kind of like the red light district of New York. And it used to be between 20th and 42nd Street, from 2nd to 5th Avenue or something. And then it kind of expanded all the way up to 57th or 62nd Street and across to 8th Avenue. So it was this really crazy hot spot of, all sorts of ladies of the night and everything and so on and so forth. But yeah, so apparently we have a Tenderloin too, but we don't really call it that anymore. That was an old phrase just back in the early 20th century and late 19th century. Anywho, back to the story, right? So when Willie was about 6, he discovered an organ in the lower house, which his mother used to play. It had deteriorated and nearly half the keys were missing. After his mother saw he was interested in it, she taught him the melodies she knew. One of the first songs he learned was Home, Sweet Home. His uncle Rob, a bass singer who ran his own quartet, taught Willie how to dance. The boy entered an amateur dance contest at the Arcadia Theater and won first place, including a prize of $10. After that, he focused more on playing music at the clubs. Willie had wanted a new piano very badly, but every time he thought his mother was able to afford it, there was a new mouth to feed. Willie got a job at Houseman's footwear store shining shoes and running errands, where he was paid $5 a week. Old man Houseman paid that much because he was pleased that Willie could speak Yiddish and also because Willie wanted to buy a piano with the money. As it turned out, piano sellers Marshall and Wendell's was holding a contest. The object was to guess how many dots there were in a printed circle in their newspaper advertisement. Willie used arithmetic to help guess the number, won, and was delivered an upright piano the next day. He played the piano from then on. He would play songs he heard in the clubs, including Maple Leaf Rag by Scott Joplin, Cannonball Rag by Joe Northrup, Black and White Rag by George Botsford, and Don't Hit That Lady Dressed in Green, about which he said the lyrics of this song were a sex education, especially for a 12-year-old boy. His other favorites picked up from the saloons were She's Got a Good Booty and Baby, Let Your Drawers Hang Low. Ooh, these all sound all spicy back in the day. Okay. By the early 1910s, he was playing at clubs in New York City and Atlantic City, New Jersey. Smith served in World War I, where he saw action in France. He also played drums with the African-American regimental band led by Ten Brim, called the Black Devils, and basketball with the regimental team. Legend has it that his nickname, the Lion, came from his reported bravery when serving as a heavy artillery gunner. Smith recalled, "When they asked for volunteers to fire the French 75, I stepped forward. French captain in charge told us, 'Well, I think it will take you a month to learn the mechanisms, and then we'll shoot you up to the front.' I learned that mechanism in 6 hours. They tabbed me as an A1 gunner right off the bat. I shot those 75s at the Fritzies for 49 days straight without a break or any relief. Word got back and the colonel came up and said, 'Smith, you're a lion with that gun.' That name stuck with me ever since." He was a decorated veteran of the 350th Field Artillery, a regiment of the Buffalo Soldiers. Around 1915, he married Blanche Morrell, née Howard. Smith and Morrell are thought to have separated before Smith joined the Army in 1917, where he served as a corporal, but they were listed in the 1920 census as living together in Newark, New Jersey. Morrell was white, and Smith was the only man in their apartment building who was classified as Black on the census. He returned to working in Harlem clubs and at rent parties. Smith and his contemporaries James P. Johnson and Fats Waller developed a new, more sophisticated piano style later called stride. Now, rent parties. My mom used to tell me about rent parties because she was raised in Harlem. Basically, what a rent party was like when Black folks was late with the rent or needed money for the rent, they didn't have enough. They would throw these parties in their homes and make food and have usually a musician there or a bunch of musicians and stuff. And the people who would come to eat and listen to the music, like people in the neighborhood, they would pay money to go. And so by doing that, the people who were throwing the party were able to raise the rent and then pay the rent. Because right back in the day, it used to be weekly, not monthly like it is now, y'all, like way, way back, weekly. Can you imagine? But those are rent parties if y'all don't know, but now you know. In the 1940s, his music found appreciation with a wider audience. Smith toured North America and Europe up to 1971. To leave the U.S., he needed a birth certificate. He went to the Orange County Courthouse and found it, but discovered that the birth certificate said he was born on November 25th, in contradiction to his mother telling him he was born on November 23rd. Smith had 10 brothers and a sister, including half-siblings. That always happens with those of us who are mixed race, especially with my parents. I got 5 half-siblings. No full siblings, just 5 half-siblings. I can relate to that. His older brother Jerome died at the age of 15. His other older brother George became an officer in Atlantic City and died in 1946. Willie said of George, "Our paths didn't cross very often in later life. His friends and connections were always on the other side of the fence from mine. His half-brother Robert owned a bar on West Street in Newark. His half-brother Melvin lived on Mulberry Street in Manhattan. Smith had no idea what became of his other 2 half-brothers, Norman and Ralph. His other siblings died as children ranging from ages 3 to 7. As a boy, Smith delivered clean clothes to his mother's clients, who included a prosperous Jewish family who invited him to sit on Hebrew lessons on Saturday mornings. Willie made his bar mitzvah in Newark at the age 13. Later in life, he worked as a Hebrew cantor for a congregation in Harlem. In his later years, he received frequent honors for his life's work, including a Willie the Lion Smith Day in Newark, New Jersey. Smith died at the age of 79 on April 18, 1973 in New York. His legacy. The linear notes of his 1958 LP, The Legend of Willie the Lion Smith, Grand Awards Records, state, Duke Ellington was never lost in his awe of the lion's prowess. He quotes Ellington as saying, Willie the Lion was the greatest influence of all the great jazz piano players who have come along. He has a beat that stays in the mind. This LP's cover features a painting of the lion by Tracy Sugarman. Ellington attested to his admiration when he composed and recorded Portrait of the Lion in 1939. Orange County, New York executive Edward Diana issued a proclamation declaring September 18th, Willie the Lion Smith Day in Orange County, the date of the first Goshen Jazz Festival. Now, here's the only thing that I didn't like about this, but I did like all the information they told us about this man. So, yeah, he sang some songs, played some songs, but I'm like, but what was his original work? Like, we talked about, how he was playing the piano based on, like, songs that were already out there, like Maple Leaf Rag and Black and White Rag, but what about his own stuff? Maybe it's just because he just played those songs everywhere that people knew about him, but it doesn't really talk so much about his life in terms of his jazz influence and his musical stuff, but more like his private life. And that's how sometimes stories go, especially when you're trying to find information on people who've been gone for a while and born way back in the day. You're going to find very little information on the person. And so you do your best to gather as much as you can to make it a cohesive, like a Wikipedia article, but apparently he was a great guy and had a full life based on all this stuff. It's just, I wish I knew more of like what, compositions he played or created or what songs he was specifically on, like in a record or where he performed. Anyway, I just wish there was a little bit more on him, but still a great dive into somebody I did not know, the Lion. So now the next person we go run into is going to be Vivian Cash. So this one was quite an interesting dive. And yeah, we've seen stuff like back in the day from what I did when I was starting my research about, Johnny Cash married a black woman. Look at this black lady. Look at her face. And she has to have black in her. So here's how this whole story goes, right? So Vivian Distant, née Liberto, formerly Cash, was basically born on April 23rd, 1934. She died May 24, 2005. So she was an American homemaker and author. She is notable as the first wife of singer Johnny Cash and mother of their 4 daughters. She inspired his first hit single, I Walk the Line. Born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, she grew up in a Sicilian-American culture and was raised Catholic. Following her marriage to Cash in Texas, she was subject to controversy in 1965 to 1966 related to her racial identity because of publicity after her husband's arrest for drug possession. White supremacists stated that she was black and thus married illegally to her husband. She and her husband were subject to harassment, and he was boycotted for a year in the South before his manager documented her background as white. After the couple divorced in 1966, they each married again. Cash had chief responsibility for raising their daughters. They typically spent time in the summer with their father and stepmother, both singer-songwriters. In 2007, Diston published a memoir prepared with Anne Sharpstein under her former married name of Vivian Cash. It was based on her years with Johnny Cash and their many letters before their marriage. So here's how it all began. On July 18, 1951, 17-year-old Vivian met Johnny Cash, an Air Force recruit in basic training, at a roller skating rink in San Antonio, Texas. The couple courted for 3 weeks before the Air Force deployed Cash to West Germany for a 3-year tour. During the separation, the couple exchanged hundreds of letters. Liberto later used these as the basis for her memoir, I Walk the Line. On August 7, 1954, 1 month after his discharge, they were married at St. Anne's Roman Catholic Church in San Antonio. The wedding mass was offered by Vivian's uncle and Catholic priest, Father Vincent Liberto. After marrying, they settled in Memphis, Tennessee, where Johnny Cash took a job as a vacuum cleaner salesman. Within the first year of their marriage, Cass had become a rising country music star. Eventually, the couple had 4 daughters together, Roseanne, Kathy, Cindy, and Tara. After his rapid success, Cash moved Vivian and their family to Hollywood, where he pursued film roles and entertainment industry connections when he wasn't on tour. In 1961, Cash moved the family to a hilltop home overlooking Casitas Springs, California. He had previously brought his parents to the area to run a small trailer park called the Johnny Cash Trailer Park. As Cash was frequently away from home on tour and the area had no amenities, Vivian and her daughters became increasingly isolated. Vivian often had to dispatch rattlesnakes and other vermin around the property. The couple was estranged in 1962. Liberto later said she had filed for divorce in 1966 because of Cash's severe drug and alcohol abuse, as well as his constant touring and his repeated acts of adultery with other women. He became particularly close with singer June Carter, whom he later married. Vivian had primary responsibility for the 4 Cash daughters. Vivian and Johnny Cash had 4 daughters, 2 of whom followed their father into show business. Roseanne became a major singer-songwriter. Kathy, something on Kathy. Cindy, who also became a singer-songwriter, author, and Tara, nothing on Tara. The next generation also entered into show business. Vivian's oldest grandson, Thomas Gabriel, is a singer-songwriter in Nashville, Tennessee. His grandson, Dustin Tittle, is a film producer. In 1968, Liberto married Dick Diston, a police officer in Ventura, California. They were married until her death on May 24, 2005, from complications of lung cancer and related surgery. She wrote a memoir, so here's the memoir part. In 2002, Vivian was approached by freelance writer-producer Ann Sharpstein about appearing in a retrospective program about Johnny Cash for VH1. Though she declined the offer, the 2 women became close friends. Vivian decided to write and publish her memoirs, hiring Sharpstein as an editor and biographer. Liberto entitled her memoir, I Walked the Line, My Life with Johnny, 2007. The book is based largely on excerpts from the thousands of letters that she exchanged with Johnny Cash during their 3-year separation before their marriage. In addition, it includes her recollections of their courtship, marriage, and Johnny Cash's rise to fame. She also addresses her feelings towards singer June Carter, who married Cash after his divorce from Vivian. In 1965, here's where this whole thing came up with her being black. Vivian's husband, Johnny Cash, was arrested in Texas for possession of hundreds of amphetamine pills and bringing drugs into the United States across the Mexican border. Though the couple had been estranged for 3 years, Vivian flew from El Paso, Texas, to accompany Cash to his court hearing. A widely circulated black and white photograph of them leaving the courthouse brought Vivian Cash to public notice for the first time. The Thunderbolt, a racist newsletter published by the Ku Klux Klan leader J.B. Stoner, published an article with inflammatory language. It was distributed by the white supremacist National States Rights Party. The headline read, Arrest exposes Johnny Cash's Negro wife. In response to the article in the Thunderbolt, Johnny Cash hired Nashville lawyer Johnny J. Hooker and threatened a $25 million lawsuit against the KKK. However, the incident soon faded and there was no effect on Cash's career at the time. Nearly 2 years later, the KKK revived their attack on the singer. They were unhappy about his criticism of the United States treatment of Native Americans and his association with counterculture figures, including Bob Dylan. Vivian and Johnny Cash were each harassed by hate mail and death threats. Flyers were distributed at Johnny Cash's concerts, urging people to call a phone number that played a recording of the Thunderbolt article. A voice and tone, the race mixers of this country continue to sell records to your teenage children. Saul Holloway, Johnny Cash's manager, met with Robert Shelton, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and threatened a $200,000 lawsuit for harassment. Holloway also contracted national and local newspapers to correct the story. His efforts included a well-received article in the New York Post. He arranged to have Vivian Cash's background researched and documented. Specialists noted Vivian's designation as white on her marriage certificate in Texas, a list of the whites-only schools she had attended in the segregated state, and letters from close associates attesting to their knowledge of her identity. With his wife established as white, Johnny Cash was judged acceptable and was booked again in venues in the South. Here's where it gets fun, y'all. In February 2021, historian Henry Louis Gates Jr., host of the show Finding Your Roots, featured Roseanne Cash as a guest. His researchers had studied both sides of her parents' families. They confirmed her mother, Vivian Liberto's paternal Sicilian ancestry, documented for 300 years as follows Sicily. Vivian's grandfather, Rosario Liberto, arrived in New Orleans in 1895 and migrated to San Antonio, Texas. There, he married an Italian woman from his hometown and founded what became a chain of successful Italian grocery stores. They found her mother's known German and Irish ancestors. They also found that one of her four maternal great-great-great-grandmothers was Sally Shields, a woman of mixed race who was born into slavery in Alabama. Her mother was an enslaved African-American. Her white father and master was William Bryant Shields, a planter born in North Carolina and the son of an Irish immigrant. He also fathered Shields' 8 siblings. He used his wealth and political influence to gain an active legislator in 1848 to free all 9 of his children. Shields was noted in other records as not recognized in good society, probably because of his acknowledgement of his mixed-race family and efforts on their behalf. The legislator's act was conditional, stipulating that the Shields' children's freedom was confined as to residents to the counties of Perry, Dallas, and Wilcox. Further, it precluded them from being able to inherit land. Gates found that Sarah had married a white man, Andrew Robinson, in 1838 in Perry County, Alabama, while she was still enslaved when the marriage was illegal. Her husband posted a $200 bond to gain registration by the county clerk to make it legal. The Robinson children were predominantly white ancestry. Their children were classified as mulatto in the 1870 census in Texas. Their son, Lafayette Robinson, was a direct ancestor of Vivian Cash's mother. Like Sarah, the Shields siblings all married white spouses, as did their descendants. According to DNA, Rosanne Cash has 3.3% sub-Saharan African ancestry. While the researchers had not found written confirmation, the DNA data indicated that Rosanne also had African ancestry on her father Johnny Cash's side. Through her African ancestry, she and her sisters are cousins of actor Angela Bassett. Who'd have thunk it, y'all, okay? Originally living near each other in Perry County, most of the extended Shields family left Alabama and migrated to Texas, where they were less identifiable as being of mixed race. To avoid being drafted into the Confederacy, the Robinson family and other Shields siblings migrated during the Civil War to Mexico for a time. After the war, they returned to Texas. By the 1830s, the census and death records of Andrew and Sarah Shields, Robinson's descendants, listed them all as white. According to Cash's official biographer, Anne Sharpstein, and her own words in her 2007 memoir, Vivian strongly identified throughout her life as a white Sicilian American, which was the culture she grew up in. She did not know about her ancestor, Sarah Shields, and her children, and never identified as multiracial or black. Cash said in her memoir, "It didn't help that Johnny issued a statement of the KKK informing them that I wasn't black. To this day, I hate when accusations and threats from people like that are dignified with any response at all." So, and the final things that we have is, this is pretty, actually, no, that's about it. I thought there was one more thing, actually, representation in other media. So here's this. Rosanne Cash dedicated her album Black Cadillac to Vivian Liberto, her father and stepmother, June Carter Cash. The tracks Burned Down This Town and I Was Watching You directly reference Vivian. Another representation, Liberto was portrayed in the Cash biopic Walk the Line by actress Jennifer Goodwin and by Anna Grace Stewart in the CMT miniseries Sun Records. And then finally, Liberto's life was chronicled in the documentary My Darling Vivian. Well, interesting on that. So you did have Black Honey, but hey, here's the thing about all that type of stuff. A lot of white folks, if they were to do DNA tests, I mean, they would realize how far back it can go, and that you more than likely have an African or African American or mixed race or mulatto, whatever they were called, in your family tree. So, but a lot of white folks don't know that because of not only the whole dynamic of passing for a lot of people who were first-gen biracial, but also just the whole one-drop rule and people, only just staying within the same shade they married or lighter to make their kids lighter. I mean, it's just so complicated. But all that type of strategy was basically how people survived back in the day. And people still do that to this day. That's why, I'm sure Roseanne Cash was surprised, hearing that she had Black in her through, her ancestors. And imagine what Vivian might have felt if she got that news, So, anywho, my darlings, I want to thank y'all for joining me today on another history lesson. We can go on and on about this whole thing. Wikipedia has a lot of information. It's always my great starting point for any sort of research. And I want y'all to download, subscribe to Generation Mix Podcast on all streaming platforms, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Spreaker, all that good stuff. You follow on Instagram at Generation Mix Podcast. I no longer do TikTok, so don't follow me on TikTok. You can subscribe to our newsletter at www.newwavemedia.org, which I am a part of. And if you want to basically email me with any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, generationmixpodcast@gmail.com, or you can call Google number 510-852-9550. So my darlings, this concludes another episode of What It Means to Be Multiracial in America, one story at a time, from the studio to the streets, and y'all have a lovely day. Ciao!